Okay. So who is this guy? Well, the first thing is probably the first kind of belonging identity crisis I had is that I'm adopted. Are there any adoptees in the room? Okay. What's your name? Aaron. Nice to meet you. Do you mind if I ask if you know your biological parents? You do not. Yeah. So I don't either. I didn't meet them until I'm 41 now. I met them 5 years ago. So that's the first kind of time when somebody told me you don't belong here. When I was a little baby and they said, get out of our biological family. Next is I am the son of divorced parents. So my adoptive parents divorced. So I was like, oh, really fucking kidding me? There's another belonging trauma. So I went from having a somewhat normal nuclear family at the age of 2 to having 2 step families at the age of 3. So that's the second belonging trauma. Anybody here have divorced parents? Okay, so a little more. We had Aaron is an adoptee, and we have about 25% of the room that's a child of divorced parents. And I'm an immigrant. I wasn't born in this country. I said it in my introduction, right? My name is spelled and pronounced Don. It's an Israeli name. I moved here when I was 9, didn't speak a word of English. Any immigrants in the house? Anybody not born in the United States? Okay, one person. Where were you born? Mexico. Awesome. So that's another kind of belonging trauma. Take you from where you think you were supposed to be to put you in a place where you're not supposed to be. I think about one of those kind of like mechanical arm machines that lifts you up and just drops you off in a new region. You have no idea what's going on. So that's kind of like my traumas. What I do, my last venture was a software company and I sold it. And what I realized, I had this kind of like breakthrough. When I sold my company, I realized that I was getting all my belonging, which we'll define in a second. I was getting it all from my private company. I was going to work, making all these people be my friends, making them bleed the company culture, do trust falls and whatever else we do in bullshit court. Let's go to that room. Should we go to that room? Doing whatever we got to do to drink the company Kool-Aid. And then I sold my company. I was like, oh my God, I'm all alone again because I was finding my sense of belonging in the company that I started. And I moved to Boise in the summer of 2020 from California. No, I'm just kidding. I moved here from the East Coast, from DC. But no hate for the Californians. In fact, we actually do a really good job of telling Californians they don't belong here just by that joke that I made. Right? When you drive around the highway, it says Californians go home. That's kind of like telling people they don't belong here. I moved here in the summer of 2020 after kind of doing a come to Jesus road trip. I sold my company. I was completely lost. And I said, let me hit the road during the pandemic. And I just fell headfirst into Boise, Idaho, fell in love with it after a 4-month road trip and never left. And in fact, I dragged my fiance here from New York City. So I'm pretty good at negotiating, I guess. And the last thing that qualifies me to speak about this topic is I'm writing a book about this thing. And it's called The Quest. And it'll be out in a year. So I'm not showing my book just yet. And that leads me to kind of this next thing, which I call the disclaimer. And why you're here. I hope you're here to understand belonging better. But this talk is really based off this book that I've written, and I've probably spent over 10,000 hours on. And therefore, because this book is still malleable, it's kind of a beta test. So I am not a trained professional, and this is probably going to be clunky. I used to speak a lot in my last company about hospitality and events. This is much deeper and much more meaningful to me. So it's probably going to be a little awkward at times. So if you want to leave at any point, I totally get it. If it's not going how you'd like. All right. So there's 5 learning objectives for today's talk, and we're going to make it interactive in a little bit. But the first LO is really to describe what belonging actually is, because we use it all the time. Like you don't belong here, but we don't know what it means. We're going to learn a 3-part process for finding belonging. We'll then understand the role that your personality plays in belonging. And I have news for you. Most of the stuff that, people say, a zebra doesn't change its stripes, right? That's a fact. The genetic set point that we'll discuss cannot be changed. 60% of who we are today cannot be changed mostly. So there's just a 40% delta of opportunity for us to really improve. And then we'll identify the different paths to belong. I think you'll walk away knowing that there's different areas to find belonging you didn't even know existed. And then finally, we'll learn how to nurture this kind of process in a cyclical way that can continue to replenish our sense of belonging. Does that sound good? All right. Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. Paid audience members are awesome. All right. So if there's one takeaway from today, it's that the way you've been going about finding belonging has been incomplete, unintentional, and probably not completely fulfilling. And what I'm here to tell you is you can embark on a process to find belonging today, and you can do it anytime, whenever you want to break the cycle and find belonging again. So I want to start by painting this kind of grim picture like any good speaker would do about why we need this solution. And that's because we have a loneliness crisis. And as we'll see in a second, belonging is the antidote to loneliness. So if you look on, let me get my, hopefully pointer, there we go. So this is the share of Americans who reported feeling lonely before the pandemic. And as we all know, the pandemic made mental health much worse to the point that the Surgeon General, for the first time ever, issued a mental health crisis warning to young Americans. So this right here, we're mostly, the audience is mostly Gen Z and millennials. But as you can see, the younger the person is, the more feeling lonely they are. So this especially impacts young people. Now, the good news is as you get older, you'll figure it out. But why aren't we doing more to help these folks to not report loneliness at 80% levels? Another stat is that most Americans are living alone, more than ever, actually, in a 50-year high. So as you can see, in the late 60s, only about 20 or 15% of Americans lived alone. And today it's almost 30%. So people are living alone. And the research doesn't lie, right? The research says if you live alone, you're more likely to be unhappy, unhealthy, and die younger. Those are facts. And Americans have less friends than ever. So this is a time series. The darker color is 1990 and the brighter color is 21. So over the past 30 years, with the exception of 1 to 4 friends, most people have less friends than they did. So US adults report 12%, 1 out of every 10 adults in America today reports they don't have any close friends. And back in the 90s, a third of American adults said they had 10 or more close friends. So the number of close friends we have is decreasing. And that's really concerning because the Harvard has this longevity study. Has anybody heard of it? It's run by a guy named Robert Waldinger, who's proven empirically that having close relationships leads to a happier, healthier life. So we need at least one close relationship in order to thrive as human beings. Don't worry, the grim part's almost over. So the deaths of despair, anybody know this term? It basically summarizes suicides, overdoses, and liver disease from alcohol. And that's been on the rise. So as we can see, the gray line is basically summing up the bottom lines. But overdoses, suicides, and alcohol-related deaths are either at or near all-time highs. And this is something that impacts at least one of the sexes, and that's coming of age. Men are having sex at an older age. 27% of men share of men under age 30 who reported 0 sexual partners. So basically, men aren't meeting women, and that creates this kind of phenomenon we know as incels. And incels creates radicalization, conspiracy theories, violence, self-harm, and so many worse things. So basically, if people aren't meeting people, like we said, they're not going to be happier, and they're not meeting people because they're not having sex. So this is an issue especially important to my sex men. And then finally, if we kind of take all these things and look at it at a sum, the number, this is according to the federal government, and basically the number of depressive episodes people have had has increased just over time, right? From 2008 to 2020, you can see 18% of American adults reported a depressive episode. Okay, so belonging is not just the antidote to loneliness, it's also the key to happiness. And can anybody here know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Can you name it? Who can? Okay, Kelly, go ahead.
I was trying.
Okay.
It was like college 20 years ago. Like food, water, shelter.
Food, water, shelter.
And
What's at the top? Somebody help her. So food, water, shelter at the top. What's at the top? Self-actualization, right? Figuring out like your purpose in life. What's the middle stuff? Anybody remember? It's the next. Okay, companionship. That's in the middle. Affiliation, belonging. So In 1943, and this has been validated by the researchers as late as 2010 by a group led by Professor Kenrick out of University of Arizona, who replaced self-actualization. I'm not going to get into it. But basically, belonging is smack dab in the middle of the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Now, bless you, there is Maslow has been criticized. He was just this white dude who basically went up to his rich philosophical white friends and said, hey, let's do this qualitative survey about what you think your needs are. But he was right. And the data has been validated time and time again by social psychologists and positive in the positive psychology field. And basically Maslow said that in the absence of love and belonging, there can be no happiness. And that was, again, validated in the 90s as well by saying that it's a fundamental human need. So if we know that we need to be happy in order to live a good life, then the question is, how much of our happiness can we control? Well, like I said in the beginning of this talk, only about 40% of our happiness can we control. So there's this thing called the genetic set point, which I'm sure Brad knows a little thing or two about. And the genetic set point pretty much decides your personality traits. So introversion, extroversion has a lot, is impacted by that. Your attachment style is impacted by that, even though that's also shaped by your environment. There's all these things that are impacted by your genetic set point that you cannot change unless you do something to shock the system, which I'm not going to get into, but we can talk about offline if you'd like. That'd be like psychedelic therapy. It'd be like SSRIs. It would be like cognitive therapy. Those are the things that change your genetic set point. But if you don't touch that, if you don't mess with it, it will not change. Then there's circumstances. That's everything from your race to where you live to whether you're married to your income. But then there's this other part, and there's this intentional activity. And in this meta-analysis that was conducted about happiness, they found that 40% of the stuff that we do, right, that can impact our happiness. So my entire argument is that if only 40% of your time can be spent on getting happiness, make sure you focus on things that give you belonging, because that's where the happiness lies. So that's what I just said. And if we can't change our genetic set point, we should at least try to understand it. And I'm not going to go over all these things, but there's pretty much a pyramid, if you will, that is composed of things that we can look at in order to really understand our personality traits and thus decide where to seek belonging. And then 40% of our happiness, like I said, can be changed. So basically, it's completely up to us in the paths that we choose in our lives. And what I'm going to posit is that most of us are choosing paths that are completely unaligned with who we actually are. I'm going to repeat that. Most of us are choosing paths that are completely unaligned with who we are. And we need to be more intentional and mindful about the paths that we choose. So now that we kind of have this working theory, let's define belonging. And belonging, I define belonging as both a feeling and experience. When you're seen and accepted, people see who you are and accept you for who you are. Right? We talked about you don't belong here is the worst thing you can say to somebody. Well, people see you and understand you. So you don't have to put up a veil. You don't have to hide yourself. You don't have to, dress a certain way. And it's validated by those around you and by yourself. And I like to think about it as 3 levels of belonging to make it pretty simple. The first one is I belong somewhere. We all probably can say that about something, whether you have an online Discord group you're a part of, whether you really love Boise, Idaho, whether you have a group of friends from college that you can't stop WhatsApping with, whatever it might be, you belong somewhere. The next level after that is I belong somewhere where I'm affirmed. So I don't just feel like I belong somewhere, like I belong at Tree Fort because Tree Fort's cool. And there's all these people, going to talks and listening to music that I like, but also I'm affirmed. I can see other people doing the same thing that affirms me. And then finally is I belong, but I also share, I don't just get affirmed. I also share the commonalities with other people. So in a way, we have a little crew right here. We're all kind of belonging seekers. At least you chose this out of your free will. We're all at Tree Fort. We're all in Idaho. We're all, I would hazard to say, somewhat intellectually curious. So this is a pretty dope crew. And I feel like I belong here because we're talking about something that we all care about. So that, my friends, is the 3 levels to belonging. And if you understand that and you start deciding things in your life that make you feel affirmed and seen and accepted by others, then you can live a more meaningful life and a more happy life. But there's a ton of spiritual bullshit out there. Does anybody love Brene Brown? Because I'm about to take her down. Does anybody love Elizabeth Gilbert and Eat, Pray, Love? Because I'm about to take her down. And this has nothing to do against women. It's just that most of the literature has been written by women because, well, let me not get into that. Careful, third rail. But there's a lot of bullshit out there. Oops, sorry. Nope. And basically, the bullshit out there says, go and find your spirituality and you will see that you belong even if you have no human connection. And the problem with that is that we are fundamentally social creatures. We need connection in order, as Maslow told us, right? We need human connection. So there's a real challenge here that if you don't seek human connection along with all the other good stuff, you're going to be left in the dark and then resentful of the folks who told you to just, go take a 6-month trip around the world and do the backpack and cross your fingers. So the process I'd like to propose is the following. It's pretty simple. It's awaken, discover, and fuel. Awaken to who you are so you can figure out where you should seek belonging and where you shouldn't. Discover the different paths to belong. When you're in your 40s, there are probably different paths to belong in your 30s and likewise 50s and 20s. And then fuel. Make sure you kind of revisit the cycle. Make sure that you're actually going out there and seeking intentional activities that find you belonging. So this is the part that's going to be a little interactive. If you have a phone, feel free to take it out right now and kind of take notes. You don't have to participate if you don't want to, but I think it will serve you. And the first thing I want to kind of go over in this pyramid is the bottom stuff, these circumstances. So the circumstances are areas that, remember, that's the 10%, right? That's the stuff that we can change, but is a little hard to change. It's where you live. It's your demographics. Obviously, you can't change that. It's your personal traits, your personal history, like trauma. And it's your status variables, married or not, whether you work or not, et cetera. So go ahead and you can write this down if you want. You can don't write it down if you don't want to. But I want to kind of walk you through how I do this for my own self. So in the beginning of this talk, I listed all my traumas. So I'm going to put all my traumas on this board so you can see what I'm talking about. So first of all, if you think about the things that I can't control, I think about a 2x2 matrix. Things under my control and outside of my control. Things that were generally looked at as a positive or triumphant, and trauma as were negative. But I just want to remind you that there is always, the PTG is the thing, post-traumatic growth. No matter what the trauma is, most people grow from the trauma they have, even if it's awful. And in fact, part of what we learn is that the trauma that we have and the pieces that were broken are put together into a better, happier self, more realized self. So on my bottom left, right, on my trauma that was outside my control, I couldn't control about being adopted. I can control that my parents divorced. So it sucked and it was traumatizing. But now I'm like, hey, I have 2 families. And hey, I have 2, well, my stepmom's awful, but you get my point. Another example is changing high school. Anybody here changed schools before the age of 18? Yeah. Keep those hands up. Take them down if you enjoyed the experience at that time. Yeah. So only 2 hands went down. Most people, thank you. You can put them down. So most people, you don't see the audience, but most people had it's about 50% of the room raised their hands when they said to change high school or under 18. And most of the hands stayed up when I said, if you were excited about it, put them down. And the reality is we all were kicking and screaming most likely when we were changing schools. But then when we zoom out 10 years later, that was pretty cool. God, that was really good. I doubled my friend group. This was the right move for me. It was a smaller class environment, whatever. So there is, I see Jen shaking her head. For most people, that's the case, at least I think. All right, so moving on to the bottom right of the quadrant, immigration. That was a triumph for me. It was outside of my control, but at the end of the day, it worked out. I got to go to another country. I got to learn another language. I got to have opportunities I didn't have, et cetera. Who here is still friends with their college homies or their high school homies? Raise your hand. Okay. I'm willing to bet that some of those circles are not necessarily the most kind of like supportive, positive circles, especially if you're men. Men tend to like stick around with their college bros, even like 40 years later. And generally speaking, it's not the most supportive group of men around. That might be different for some of you, but that's generally what I've observed. So sometimes we join these false circles that we don't really enjoy. And then finally, entrepreneurship. Like that's something I was under my control. It was Triumph. I had a great company. I felt like I belonged there, but then it disappeared as soon as I left it. Okay, so now that we're going to get to the fun stuff, we're going to do a little test. So your phone should be out, and we're going to go ahead and give ourselves a rating. And hopefully somebody will volunteer to share what their results are. But I would like for you to, on a scale of 1 through 5, rank the following. Your default mood. Not right now, because we're looking at kind of like where your default is, your baseline. That's on a scale of 1 through 5. 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And then your general anxiety level. Are you an anxious person? 5. Are you like super chill, not anxious at all? 1. And then your general happiness level, 1 through 5. So we're going to average that. So take that up, add the 1 through 5s up, and then divide it by 3. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. And if Jacob can kick up some cool music while we do that, that'd be awesome. Yeah. All right. Then divide by 3. Yeah, you got to get the average. So that your result should be, and we're going to round up because we're fucking awesome. So we're going to round up. Okay, so remember, we're averaging these 3 inputs. So my friend Gabe in the back, he's probably a 5. Because he's not a high anxiety. He's probably 3.5, 4. He's 5 on happy, 5 on mood, and he's like 1 on anxiety. All right. So thank you, Jacob. All right. So keep that down. Let's move on to the next little Quizlet, if you will. And this, we're going to measure the need to belong. This is a empirically validated, for those stats people in the room, this is a construct in social psychology that's been validated by the science, and it's called the need to belong. And we're going to do this again. And Jacob's going to give us that music again, except this time, we're going to, just basically read the directions. We're going to go ahead and just come up with our need to belong. And the goal is to see whether we're high or low on this. And I want to stress positive emotional style and negative emotional style in the previous slide is not a bad or good thing. Need to belong. High is not a good thing. Low is not a good thing. We just want to know where you're at. So your need to belong, basically try to figure out, are you high or are you low, figuratively. And we're going to rate the agreement we have with these statements on a 1 through 5. So if you're all 5s, you're high. If you're all 1s, you're low. And if you're in the middle, you're in the middle. And Jacob's going to give us a little music. All right. Thank you, Jacob. Oh, okay. No. We're good. All right. Okay. I would like a volunteer who wants to share their results with the next slide. Kelly. Oh my God. The audience plants are the best. Okay. Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. All right. So we're going to give it to Kelly. And Kelly, you're going to tell us, should we show her the animal she's going to be, or should we first have her read the results and then figure out the animal she's going to be? Have her read first. Okay, read first. All right. So what's your emotional style?
Okay. You want me to round up?
Yeah.
That'd be 4s.
You're a 4 in emotional style. What's your need to belong?
4s.
4. Okay. So you're a dog.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a puppy.
Yeah, you're a puppy. Okay, great. Anybody? See, that wasn't that hard. We want another volunteer. Anybody want to? Sir in the back. What's your name? Yep. Jacob, awesome. So Jacob, what animal are you? That's a swan, by the way.
I don't. Yeah, I guess I'd be a swan. I have a 3 for emotional and a 5 for need to connect.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay to say need to connect. It's actually kind of synonymous.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Last volunteer, anybody? All right. Sir in the back.
Yeah, I have it 3, 4, and 5.
3, 4, and 5. Okay, so where are 3, 4, and 5? What's the help me because we're supposed to have 2 numbers. So where 3 and where are you? What was your emotional style? What was your rank for the first one?
The emotional style, I'm more enthusiastic.
Okay, what were you on a 1 through 5?
It would be 4
Okay, 4. Okay, so positive. Okay, what was your need to belong?
and 3.
3. Okay, cool. So kind of in the middle. You're like a cross between. You're like a liger. So you're a cross between positive emotional style, but koala and a dog. So you're like a dog with a koala face. All right, I saw one more hand here from my beautiful fiance, Jen.
I was a dog koala as well.
Dog koala. Okay. You're a dog koala. All right. So the reason I chose these, I did this today at like 11:30 a.m. So I'm not sure these are the right animals. But I didn't want to like just name the quadrants. And I think it makes sense, right? Like birds of a feather flock together, but swans are kind of like loners. And then dogs are obviously always happy, either alone or whatever with a pack. Koalas are just like always chilling and they don't want to be bothered. And then cats are just cats. All right. So now that we know our animal, we can start figuring out where we belong. And this part is my favorite part of the talk because this is when I really got excited about the research and realized there are so many paths to finding belonging I didn't even know existed. So before we do this, we're going to do another mic sesh, if you don't mind. I would like to just hear from the audience. Where do you find belonging? Based off of what I said or based off kind of what feels right to you? The average person finds belonging in 7 places, and the range is about 3 to 17. So I like to think about it like a tank. And your tank is either full of a bunch of stuff or just full of one thing, or maybe it's half full of one thing, or maybe it's half full with a bunch of stuff. And our goal is to fill it with as many stuff as we need, but make sure it's always full. So where do you currently find belonging? Let's kind of just get some starts here. I see a hand over there, please. Mike is coming to you around through the back, making his way into the middle aisle. He's running. He's wearing a green shirt. He's almost with you, and he's got the mic. All right.
I find belonging with being outside with my friends.
Okay, awesome. So outdoors with your friends. Fantastic. How many friends usually?
Anywhere from like, at least one.
At least one. Okay.
1 to 10
Okay.
is the
All right.
average, I would say.
Cool.
Yeah.
And do you keep in touch with these friends in any other way, or it's just like you meet them outside?
In all ways, going for lunch, just hanging out.
Yeah. Do you guys like keep in touch like on a text message or something? Like, yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Where else? Where do you find belonging? And remember, your answers can help other people too, right?
I thought you were going to say something. I was going to say my art. I don't really know how to describe that.
Okay.
But yeah.
What's your art of usually?
Landscapes and abstract and honestly all over the place.
What's it inspired by?
Surfing, which was my other thing I was going to say.
Okay. Yeah. So when you go surfing, do you go with somebody else or do you go alone?
I like to go with people. Yeah.
Okay.
But I can also go alone.
Yeah. And does you feel like it's connecting with yourself when you do that?
Yes, for sure.
And connecting with nature, perhaps? Awesome. Thank you. I saw another hand over here.
School and work.
School and work. Can you say more about that? So school in your program specifically?
Yep. I'm
Which
in the
program is that?
Social work program.
Okay.
So pretty social.
That's why you're doing the work?
That's why I'm doing the work. Da-dum-psh. And then I teach yoga and I'm also a kickboxing coach. So
All right,
both
awesome.
are like community oriented.
Yeah. So all kind of group affiliation. And the school thing, is it only other people in your major or is it like random people in the hallways?
Only other people in my major. Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Do we have a man here who wants it? We want to order for 3. All right. We got a yellow jacket, please. And then we have 2 more hands. This is awesome. So thank you so much for participating. Go ahead.
I was also going to say my job.
Okay. And what is it about your job that helps you find belonging?
It's very social. I have to talk to people pretty much every minute of every day. So it's nice to kind of just connect. And
Do you mind telling us what you do?
I'm an academic advisor.
Okay. And would you consider the people you talk to having any relationship other than the fact you advise them?
No.
Okay. So I wanted to highlight this because that's a very different, that's social. We just highlighted two very different social paths, which are delineated in what I'm about to show. We had another hand over there.
I'm biased, but Hackfort, I've helped run the thing for a while. And yeah, without like that community building aspect, like I'd be a totally different person, you know? So yeah, Hackfort being involved in Treefort in some way, it's like the most belonging I've ever really felt outside of family and work.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And we had one more hand in the back from Koala Dog.
It would be with entrepreneurs and the entrepreneur community.
Okay, awesome. So for the entrepreneurs, the entrepreneur community. All right, cool. So, all right, this is my favorite slide of the whole thing. And this is based off of work by Jennifer Hirsch and Margaret Clark out of Yale University. And basically they did a meta-analysis of all the different paths to belonging. And I took their work and I added a little bit to it. So we're going to identify 6 different paths to belong. And you notice that most of the people, there were some hints of non-social stuff, but we really haven't seen too much of it. So let's kind of dive in. So intimate relationships, that's the first thing. These are relationships that have secure attachment. That means that if I tell you something, you're not going to just slam the door in my face. And it means that these can be romantic, these can be friends, these can be family. But intimate relationships is one path to finding belonging. Another path is micro interactions. Our friend who's an academic advisor here actually said this when he answered. He said, I like to advise people and I don't really have a connection with them. And that's just social interactions that happen every day. That can be waving to your neighbors. The good old Albertsons run produce section, great way to find belonging. People are always nice there. Talking to the barista at Dutch Brothers. I mean, those guys really crush it, right? I mean, they're called broistas, by the way. I don't know if you know that. But you roll up and they're like, how's your day going? You're like, shut the fuck up. I'm trying to get a coffee. But they keep talking. And by the end of like once you get coffee, you're like, okay, that felt pretty good. And acquaintances. These are kind of like these, what we would call not whole relationships. Collective affirmation. So this is basically, anybody here go to music festivals? All right. Yeah. So that's called collective effervescence. And basically it's this idea that there's actually a study that shows that people that went to Burning Man still feel a sense of belonging from Burning Man a year later. So that can be anything from music festivals, kind of like these collectives, to group membership. Hackfort's a great example, right? We're all here. We all associate with one another. We're affiliated with one another, and we get belonging from it, even though we may not know everything about each other. Symbolic bonds. These are kind of like, this is getting a sense of belonging from things that remind us of other people. So this is going through photos, right? That old time hop, right, on Facebook, seeing that photo. Eating comfort food that reminds you of your family. Reading novels where you get immersed with the characters. Watching Peaky Blinders or another show you love on Netflix and getting to love those characters. Those are all symbolic bonds that give us a sense of belonging because they remind us of social connection. Esteem building. These are things that make us feel good. Like, wearing a bracelet. That's me. I feel good walking around with it. I see other people wearing it. Like, yeah. Waving a flag, right? We know that's a big thing in this country. Whatever you believe in. People love their flags, whether it's Don't Tread on Me or the American flag or the Ukraine flag or whatever. Those are all symbolic bonds that we we try to find belonging. Even driving a luxury car, makes people feel like they have a sense of belonging. Like I'm with the cool, rich people. And now there's more research that shows that even following people, having an online following gives people a sense of belonging. So all these influencers that are like, just like, hi guys, check out my makeup routine. That's actually giving them a sense of belonging because they have people who look up to them. And then finally, transcending. And this is really just an experience with the self. This is about going deeper with who you are, whether it's with the universe or God or whatever you want to call it, it's just exploring the interconnectedness that you have, when realizing that we are the same matter we're all made of. And it's that connectedness to a greater sense of belonging that exists. Anybody see Fantastic Fungi? Yeah. All right. Woo. Connected. All right. Okay. So back to our 2x2. Swans, dogs, cats, and koalas. So basically, now that we know our personality trait, positive or negative affective style, or I call it emotional style, and we know our need to belong, high or low, I would argue neither one is good. Middle is where you want to be. We can kind of identify the paths that fall in this. So, for example, for the dogs in the place where they're high, the Kellys, right? They have a high need to belong and they are high positive emotional style. They need a lot of intimate relationships. And I actually know Kelly pretty well, and she has a lot of friends that she would call best friends. We need a lot of collective affiliation. Kelly goes to a lot of parties. She goes to a lot of barbecues. She goes to like every other weekend. She's like, hey, you want to go to this festival? I'm like, I've never heard of it. She's like, come on down. Kelly should practice transcendence so she doesn't have to go and seek all these connections outside, and she can find it inside. And sometimes, not necessarily Kelly, but sometimes people who have a high need to belong, like myself, who have traumas from the past, need to address them. And we do seek esteem building paths in order to feel better about ourselves, that we belong somewhere. So if you're a swan and you have a high need to belong, but you're kind of like a more anxious person, you need less intimate relationships. You need more symbolic bonds because it involves less people, right? You don't want to deal with people all the time. You're like sick of people. And you need esteem building as well, paths. For the positive emotional style and the koalas in the room and don't have a high need to belong, they need a lot of intimate relationships, but not a lot of collective affiliation and these micro interactions that we spoke about earlier, like Dutch Brothers or whatever. And then finally, if you're a cat, you don't need a lot of intimate relationships and you just need symbolic bonds. You just be left alone. And that's how you find belonging. Okay. And by the way, I love people taking photos of this. I'm happy to send this deck as well at the end, but feel free to take as many photos as you want. Okay. So now that we figured out that belonging is personal, we figured out everybody can find belonging through different ways, even some ways you didn't think about. It's time to fuel this kind of, this tank of ours to make sure it's always running. So what's the point of all this, by the way? The point is persistent joy. And I want to kind of go over the difference between pleasure, happiness, and joy, because this is the key, I think, to committing to doing the work. And as our social worker friend said, it is the work, and that's the joy, in my opinion. If you anyone watch the Jonah Hill Stutz documentary on Netflix, right? Stutz in it says, life is about the work. And people who give up on the work kind of have given up on life. I'll hazard to say most of you have not because you're in this room. So this is like 3 axes. It's a little complicated, but basically the y-axis is altruistic and selfish. The x-axis is fleeting and persistent. In other words, it comes in and goes. Persistent as it stays. And then this z-axis is whether it's an outward expression or an inner feeling. And the bottom line is pleasure is constantly chasing the rabbit. It's always trying to get pleasure-seeking activities. It's operating from a place of desire, which is not a good place to be because we always want more and it's never enough. Happiness is kind of in the middle. I'm happy. I'm not. Well, I'm just generally happy or generally not, but it doesn't really have a persistent state. And that's where joy comes in. And that's where there's this constant feeling of no matter what happens, I am in a joy state. It's going to be okay. And I am happy, chronically happy, if you will. All right. So wrapping up, as we're almost at time, I want to kind of talk about this idea of belonging intelligence. Who here's heard of emotional intelligence? Okay. About 80% of you. Can anybody name what are the 5 components of emotional intelligence? Just shout them out. Empathy. Self-awareness. Social skills. Motivation, and self-regulation. So basically, you can regulate how you show up. You are motivated to show up. You are aware how you show up. You empathize with the people you show up to. and whatever the last one is. And then you can actually show up, social skills. Okay, so I came up with this thing called belonging intelligence. And basically, these are the skills that you need, in my opinion, to persist that replenishing the fuel tank. The first one's self-awareness, and we talked about that. We did that today. You're walking out of here just hopefully knowing a little bit about yourself and about kind of what your needs are as it relates to finding belonging. Risk-taking. This is about just finding new paths. Like, I want to try a new path because I realized something about myself, or I want to try, or I'm going to maybe cut out a path that doesn't work for me. And the last one we really didn't talk about, but it's basically a kind of shock to the system. It's a bold step to change your circumstance. So leaving Boise or wherever you live, if you're in an unfulfilling relationship, breaking that off. Those are shocks to the system that can change your sense of belonging. Accepting rejection. And this works both ways. It's either somebody telling us we don't belong here and saying, thank you, as opposed to fuck you, because they're telling us that they're not seeing us and they're not accepting us. And that is great because we now have more room in our tank to do something that's fulfilling. And also the ability to gracefully reject somebody who may not be serving us. I, for example, had a best friend I did that road trip I told you about with, who I no longer talk to. And that rejection, while hurtful, was really worked out well for me. Social maintenance is just the discipline to do the stuff that keeps us, that if we know something works for our belonging, making sure that we keep doing it. For example, I started calling when I was doing this slide a few weeks ago, I started calling my mom every day. And yes, it's a to-do list that Jen makes fun of me of. I just check off, but that's part of my maintenance because I know I get belonging from my mom because she's the only mom I got. And then finally, transcendence, this idea of connecting with the self and this desire to get to know ourselves better and realizing that just like there's an immense world out there, there's also an immense world in here. And it's exploring that. And that's through meditation or whatever other form of seeking you choose. So I want to summarize everything in one slide. I call it the 4 steps to belonging epiphany. And the first step is seeking belonging intentionally, right? The separation of who you are and our belonging tank, just kind of knowing that those two things exist, understanding who you are, understand belonging is unique to who you are, being mindful about seeking belonging, and then finally continuing to nourishing your belonging intentionally. And I'm just curious, does anybody know the meaning of life? What was that? Kelly, what's the meaning of life? Love, okay. Finding joy? It ends. So if it's going to end, you should err on love. You should find joy and focus on the 40% that works well for you. So if you liked what I said, and we're wrapping up right now, it's my last slide. I'm going to start a masterclass on finding belonging. I'm going to basically, whoever signs, it's free. And if you sign up, we'll meet a few times. I'm really good. I think Gabe and Brad in the room can attest to the fact that I can facilitate a pretty decent job. So I promise it'll be awesome. And I would love to talk more about this with you and help you on your path of seeking belonging. And if you want to do that, you can text me. I'll leave this up over here. You can hit me up and text me and I will start a masterclass. It'll probably be like a 4-hour commitment over 4 months. So not a big deal. And we'll decide how we want to run it once we have a group of people together. And hit me up on the socials and email me if you want this deck. And that's really it. I think they say happy tree for it, but we're going to say happy hack for it. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you so much. We're right at time. If there are any questions, I'll hang out. And otherwise, thanks for being here. Enjoy the day.